First, I'll just begin by saying I am a scientist. I'm a multidisciplinary scientist, a degreed earth scientist with a strong background in the life sciences, math, physics, computer science, and archaeology. And I say that because it is that background that allows me to stay current with the publications, the very technical and in some cases, the obscure publications that are revealing new discoveries that change the way we think about ourselves, about our bodies, our relationship to our bodies, our capabilities, our potential, our relationship to the earth, our relationship to time, to the cosmos. And a lot of that information, Ross, is simply not being shared in the mainstream. So our young people today are actually being taught information about their bodies and what they're capable of that we now know is obsolete. It's based on false assumptions of obsolete science. But until these discoveries and the content is approved in the curricula by the school boards and public schools, teachers can't teach legally. They are not allowed to teach these new discoveries. So what I want to do in this book and the previous books is bring facets of those discoveries to the forefront in our lives in ways that are meaningful to us, to help us navigate our time of extremes. I think we all know that we're living a time of extremes, and it's not enough just to survive. We want to thrive. We want to navigate in a healthy way whatever it is that life brings to our doorstep. So that was the impetus for me putting this book together. As a scientist, I'm a student. I'm still learning. But the new discoveries are showing very clearly, now this is really interesting, that the words that we use to communicate with one another, like the words I'm using with you right now, and the words that we use to communicate with ourselves. Now, this is really important because the scientists tell us the average person, we have about 60 to 80,000 words that we speak to ourselves on in a 24-hour period. Many of them are the same words. They're loops that we give. So the words that we use not only determine how we think about the world and about how we solve our problems, but the mind blower is the words that we use determine what we're even capable of conceiving.
Right.
If we want new and innovative solutions, the language that we use determines the parameters that we even allow ourselves to explore. And the reason, this is where the science comes in, the reason is because those words are directly linked to neurons in the heart that were discovered in 1991. Now, they were published in 1994, the first journals describing the neural network of the heart, as well as the neural network in the brain. So the words we use determine, you've all heard this, this term, how the neurons wire and fire together. And the way they wire and fire determines how we perceive our relationship to the world, how we solve our problems, how we treat one another, how we heal our bodies, how we create our relationships, all of those things. So this is where the science is going. Now, as a researcher, for over 40 years, I have had the opportunity to travel and to lead groups into some of the most remote, isolated, magnificent, beautiful, pristine places remaining on the earth, from the highlands of central China and Tibet and the monasteries in Nepal and India, and all through the Quero villages in the Andes of southern Peru, and with the shamans in the Yucatan, all through the American desert Southwest, the Bedouin of Egypt. I've had the opportunity to study with these people to understand what they have known that we have simply forgotten, and what they understand that we're only beginning to come to terms with. in terms of our relationship to the world. And the reason I say this is because as different as those traditions are from one another, there are things that are common to them that weave them together. And one of those is that every ancient culture, every ancient tradition has always had words and phrases that they turn to in times of need for comfort, for strength, for reassurance, in times of loss. You know, we're all experiencing loss right now, whether it's the loss of our loved ones or the loss of a way of life. We are all mourning a loss of something. A lot of us don't know that. And if we don't know that, it impacts the decisions that we make and our relationships, the way we live our lives. Our immune response is all linked to that. So when I wanted to put this book together, what I found is over the last 40 years is that every culture has these words that have worked for them. And they've been preserved as mantras, prayers, hymns in terms of the Gnostic traditions, Sanskrit traditions, the ancient Aramaic traditions, the pre-Hebrew language, Native American traditions. And so I wanted to bring, I'm looking over here because the book was just released in paperback, and I'm glancing here because it's the little paperback. What I wanted to do was to put together a quick reference guide by categories. So there is a category of protection, and there's a category of loss, and within each category, put together 4, maybe 5 of these word codes that have worked for our ancestors in the past, because if it worked for them for so well, there's a good chance they're going to work for us as well. I'll give an example before we close out here today. But that was the impetus for writing the book. I'll just share a secret. It should have been called Wisdom Codes Book 1, because there are so many that I had to draw from the ancient Vedas and the Hindu traditions and the Buddhist traditions and the Christian and pre-Christian and native and indigenous. And so it was very healing for me, actually, to go through and to call this information and put it into a book. It can be read cover to cover, but more often than not, it's a quick reference. Small format book. You can carry it in your purse or your briefcase, and to be able to share those word codes in meaningful ways. So it's a long answer to a short question, but that was the impetus for me putting the book together. And since the book has been written, even newer discoveries now are substantiating the fundamental premise of the book. I want to share something with our viewers here. It is the epigraph at the very beginning of the book that was, and I'm going to read it directly so I get all the words correct. Okay. It's from a neuroscientist, Andrew Newberg. He's an MD. Listen to what he says. He goes, "A single word has the power to influence the expression of genes that regulate physical and emotional stress." Right. So what he's saying is something that we can't see and we can't touch has the ability to literally shift the fundamental code of our biology that we can touch and we can see. So we can see the upregulation or the downregulation of genes that result directly from the language that we use. And that makes these words, and we've always known words were powerful. The second part of the epigraph is from Emily Dickinson. And she's not a scientist, but she understood the power of words. And she said, "I know nothing in the world that has as much power as a word." You can't get any clearer than that. It's not science, but it's true. It's the deep truth of our relationship to language. So in each of the codes, in addition to giving the codes, I want people to understand where they come from. So I give the code, I give the source so people can go and check these things out on their own. If there is a native language, I offer the native language of Navajo or There's Aramaic, there's Sanskrit, and in the audio recordings, people can actually hear. I recorded this myself in the studio, so people can actually hear how these ancient mantras in Sanskrit and Aramaic and the prayers are actually stated.
Wonderful. And you're talking about these ancient languages, and I guess this is a two-part question because the power of the word affects our feelings, which then affects our physiology, our biology, and our perceptions and our capacity to think in different ways. I'm curious, first off, how it affects, how that process works in the body, but also the other part of it is around the language itself. And has there been any studies done that indicate whether, let's say Sanskrit, for example, a lot of the teachers from those traditions will say it's one of the original languages and
Yeah.
it has a lot of power. Have they found that one language might hold more power than English, for example?
Uh, it's. I'm going to start with the second question first, and they're both good questions. It's less about it appears to be less about the language itself, and it's the significance that we attach to the sounds that the language makes.
Okay.
So to really flesh out this answer, and I describe this in the first chapter in the book, we'll go back to early linguistics, early in the 20th century. And you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is how the universe works. What some people say is a total fluke that led to this understanding is actually the foundation for the modern study of linguistics. Harvard University, mid 1930s, there was a professor that took a sabbatical, and he asked a friend of his to sit in for him for a semester and teach linguistics. He opted to teach indigenous linguistics for a language that was very poorly understood in the early 20th century. It was the language of Hopi. The man's name was Benjamin Lee Whorf. And if anyone's listening and has ever studied linguistics, you know exactly where I'm going with this. What Benjamin Lee Whorf had to do before he could teach is he had to understand the language. And he spent time with the Hopi that apparently very few people had done from this perspective in the past. What he understood, what he began to understand, Ross, is really interesting, that the Hopi live in the present moment. Now, a lot of spiritually oriented people say, oh yeah, I live in the now, I live in the present. But the Hopi really live in the present, and their language reflects that because they have no words in their language to separate the future from the past. They cannot talk about the past. They can't talk about the future. They have no words to separate what's happening in one place or another. It is all alive. In the Hopi language, the universe is alive. It's conscious. The world is conscious. It's present, and it is happening in the now. So, for example, and these sound very awkward when I talk about these examples. If you were standing with a Hopi elder and you were looking, if you were standing on a beach in Vancouver and you're looking at the waves coming in, you and I would probably say, hey, look at that wave. By doing that, we've separated ourselves from the wave. We've said that, and we've isolated that wave from all the other waves. The Hopi, in a very awkward way, because there is no direct translation, but what they would say is, see the waving, because it is happening in the moment and it's not separate from the other waves. See the waving. Or if you're looking at lightning, we had an amazing lightning storm 2 nights ago. And people would say, wow, did you see that lightning? I hope he would say it is lightning-ing because it is occurring in the present moment. Now, here's why this is important. When you talk about the Hopi worldview, they see everything as connected. They see everything as alive. They see us as part of a unified field, part of a unified ecosystem, part of a unified consciousness. And that is reflected in the policies that they create, the laws of their tradition that they choose to live by, the way they heal their bodies, the way they honor their ancestors, the way they think of time, the way they build their relationships, the way they build their communities, the way they educate their children. So it's more than just a philosophical conversation. It is actually the foundation of the way that they see their relationship to the world and live their lives. English, on the other hand, is a very good language for technology. But English, we see us as separate from everything else. So there's you and me, them and us, over there, over here, past, present. And it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but it has an influence. And this is where this idea of and the tradition, the study of linguistics began from this perception. And now with the new technology, we can actually see how the neurons begin to bind and fire together when we begin to use these words and we begin to think and see the world differently. So that's the power of the language. In terms of the human body, I'm just going to do this very quickly.
Okay.
Because the science is giving us the reasons to think about ourselves very differently. In the mainstream media, there is a battle playing out right now. And I think there's a battle for our thoughts. We all know that. Everyone is competing to tell us what to think and how to think. There's a battle for our beliefs, what we believe about our origin. Where do we come from? Are we the product of a random process, or are we the product of some kind of an intelligent intervention? Where did the universe come from? Is the universe dead and inert, or is it alive, conscious, and connected? And by the way, that's what the science is showing, that the universe now, new discoveries, it is conscious, it is intelligent, it is ordered, it's not random. All of those battles are playing out, but for me, they are all static. They're all noise for a deeper battle, a battle for our very humanness that is playing out right now. We are being taught that we are weak, powerless, frail, and we're being taught that carbon-based life in general and humans specifically are flawed, and that we need technology to realize our potential and to save us. This is the conditioning that now is coming for our young people. On the one hand, the other hand, listen to the new science. What the science is telling us is every cell, the average human body has about 50 trillion or so cells, whatever average is. Every one of those cells has an electrical potential of about 0.07 volts, small. But when you multiply that by 50 trillion, all of a sudden we've got 3.5 trillion volts of electrical potential in the human body. Wow. And then just to wrap your mind around what that means, if you can envision a 12-volt battery in your car, 12-volt car battery, or solar panel battery is what we use them for now, 3 billion of those 12-volt batteries it takes to equal the potential in a single human body.
Wow.
It doesn't stop there, because every cell is a transistor, it's a resistor, it's a capacitor, and these are components that massage information as they pass through our computers and the computer I'm talking to you now, and our mobile phones. Our cells function in the same way. Every cell is a transmitter of photons of light. We emit light. We receive light. That light is information informing our bodies. The surface of every cell, and the surface of every cell has receptors that are antenna. They are receiving chemical signals, we know that, but they are receiving electromagnetic signals and even beyond. And inside the cell, in the nucleus, the DNA is an antenna. The genes are even finer antenna. We are gated circuits. And all of this, when we begin to think of our bodies from this perspective, we are literally a soft technology. It's not a technology based on hard computer chips and wires and chemicals. We're talking about neurons and cell membranes and crystalline bone. And here's what ties it into this book. We are the only form of life known to exist today. I'm sure there are others in the cosmos, but we're the only form that we can confirm today that has the ability, Ross, this is so beautifully awesome for me to say this. We're the only form of life with the ability to self-regulate our biology, to self-regulate all of those components, all of that electrical potential, and direct that for our healing, or to awaken the longevity enzymes in our body, or to create resilience to change, or awaken deep states of intuition, or to rewire neurons so that we can achieve our greatest capacities. We're the only form of life that we know of that can self-regulate. So what I mean by that is we're the only form of life that can sit in a chair in a moment in time and say, in this moment, I choose to awaken the longevity enzymes to give me, if you're living a long time, it means you are healing, you are rejuvenating, you're regenerating. The only form of life that can say in this moment, I choose to ignite a powerful immune response. And man, who doesn't want that? And so much more. So this is why when we use, and it's not just words, in the book I talk about a biological state that is called coherence. When we can create coherence in our bodies and then apply the word codes, that is where we are very, very potent in terms of our ability to influence not only our inner world, but how we function in the world around us. And that is something our young people simply are not being taught. And because they're not being taught, they are willing to give their biology away to technology as individuals. As a society, this is up for all of us right now. And I talk about this. We've done television specials, got new books coming out on this, because here's the thing. Once we relinquish our biology to a chip or a wire or a chemical, our bodies, we've all heard the term use it or lose it. Our bodies begin to atrophy for those capabilities, and we lose the potentials and the capabilities that define our humanness in one generation. The next generation, pretty soon, kids that are born, if we're not using it in our generation, the body says we don't need these functions any longer. And we begin to give away the very essence of what we cherish as human. And I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, or bad. I'm saying before we give it away, we owe it to ourselves to know what we're giving away. And that is where the new discoveries are important. So this book is identifying one of those. The words that we use influence and allow us a deeper potential to self-regulate our biology. The book, Human by Design, or The Science of Self-Empowerment, goes into that much deeper. All of our books talk about this in one form or another. So we just covered a lot of ground, but I wanted to give a context. It's more than just it is a nice book, but it's more than that. It is a vital book in the time when our very humanness is being challenged, taking and marrying two great ways of knowing: the wisdom of our ancestors that weren't scientists, but they understood our relationship to our bodies and the world, and the discoveries of science that now understand those relationships, but they're not really sure how to apply them. So we're building on the best science of the modern world with 5,000 years of human experience, weaving them into a wisdom that's greater than either could be on their own. And that gives us the evolutionary edge, I believe, to thrive and transcend our time of extremes. And that's why I wanted to release this book. So I want to give an example, but before I do, I'm just going to stop. Does that make sense, what I've shared?
Absolutely, it does. And if I can just interject and let our audience know, in about 3-4 minutes, we're going to take just one or two questions from the audience. We just have a shorter interview. Gregg's got a tight schedule today, so I just want to let everyone know, put your questions in the Q&A tab.
You know what? I have another interview coming up, and it's a soft interview, and I told them this one may run late, and I just talked a lot more than you did. So if we go, we can go to a quarter to the hour. I'll push this to a quarter to the hour because I'd like to take some of the questions, but I also want to give an example of what one of these wisdom codes is all about. You okay if I do it that way?
That's great. Thank you so much, Gregg. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you, and I certainly, we love our audience. I tend to think of it more as of a community than an audience,
Yeah.
but there is an audience that's there. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in today, for all your support for me over the years and for Banyan Books over all those years, 50 years. I've only been doing this 40 years, so you guys got 10 years on me. And you don't look like you've aged at all. So I'd like to, we're kind of talking, we're covering a lot of ground. Let me get a little bit more concrete with the wisdom codes. There are so many examples I could give. There is one particular code. I'm hesitating a little bit because I don't know how much of a story I want to tell, but there is one particular wisdom code that I use almost every day of my life. And it is a Navajo prayer. I'm coming to you today from a studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we're surrounded to the north. It's Navajo land. So this is very close to me and my history and my experience. In the Navajo traditions, they view beauty as a force of nature rather than simply an aesthetic. When we talk about beauty, as a scientist, I was taught beauty. You look at something, you say, oh, that's beautiful, cool. What's next? Navajo think of beauty from literally as a force of nature. So physicists will tell us there are four fundamental forces of nature. There's gravity, the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. And these are the four forces they're always trying to unify into the unified physics. Navajo tell us there's a fifth force, and that is a force of beauty. It is more than an aesthetic. It literally is a force, and that we are changed in the presence of beauty. So when we behold what we perceive as beauty, there is a chemical and a biological and a neurological change that happens inside of us. Literally, our perception of beauty is changing our biology. So this is the basis for this prayer. Now, the original prayer, it's a long prayer that I have in the book, used in ceremonies, and there's an abbreviated form of this prayer that I'll share with you now. It's 3 short phrases. And it simply states the beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. The beauty I live with reminds us that beauty exists everywhere. It's already there. Our job is to seek it out and to find the beauty in all things. Sometimes it's difficult to find the beauty in tragedy or in loss. But what this prayer says, if we look hard enough, we will find beauty in everything. It's the beauty that I live with. So we don't have to create it. Our job is to seek it out. The beauty that I live by invites us to allow the presence of that beauty that already exists, to allow that beauty to play a foundational, fundamental role in our lives. The beauty upon which I base my life is the proclamation that beauty becomes a foundation or a keystone upon which our choices and our relationships revolve. If we can honor this principle of beauty, find this principle of beauty, honor that principle of beauty in every business relationship, in every emotional relationship, in every health relationship, this is where we find our power. So I find myself, I'll tell you, I'll just be very honest with our audience. The reason I'm hesitating, I lost my mom early in the year, and Sunday was Mother's Day. It was my first Mother's Day without my mom in the world. And lo and behold, as an author, I turned to my own book. I turned to my own book of the wisdom codes, and this is under the chapter of strength. And the beauty prayer I look to for strength, and I use this a lot. If I know I'm going to have a difficult phone conversation, with a producer trying to produce a physical event somewhere in Europe, can't happen. Sometimes those are difficult conversations. So I will use this prayer often. I'll say, the beauty I live with, the beauty I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. I feel different when I say that. And I also say it in the presence of the coherence that I mentioned. I can't go into that in detail in this brief conversation, but I do describe it in the book.
Yeah,
So
get
I
the book,
create the,
folks. He
yeah,
goes into
I create the coherence in my body. Then for me, either out loud or often silently, I'll recite that mantra, that powerful prayer, and then I'll click that Zoom link or make the phone call. And I become more objective and less reactive in difficult situations. And I think that's a good place for all of us to be. It's so easy. There's so much hurt in the world right now. And if the hurt is not understood, it's often expressed as fear. And that fear will come out as anger and hate. And it's not personal, typically. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And so the more that we can find that place of neutrality, the more objective we can be when it's incoming, when you're getting the hurt and the anger and the hate. Don't react in the same way. So I wanted just to say that and share with you a little bit an example of one of these. And I also offer that in the Navajo language as well. It's a very, very different way of using vowels. It's a vowel-based language.
I
You know,
noticed.
Navajo was so powerful. Navajo is the language that was used by the code talkers in World War II because when the foreign armies, when they were trying to crack the intercepted codes that they were picking up on the radio waves, they were looking for patterns that are typical in the Romance languages, in typical Western languages. So they were looking for consonants and vowels and the word and Navajo doesn't work that way, and they were never able to break that code. So I
Nice.
think it's a very powerful language if people want to listen and read the syllables for themselves. So
Yes,
I'll stop there, and we have a few minutes if we want to entertain some of the questions. If we do, we have some questions.
we do. We do.
Cool.
Um, and I just want to say, this book is a wonderful reference, and I'm going to keep it on my shelf for sure. Uh, and that Navajo language, like you said, when I read the Navajo, there was something like quite powerful about. I said it out loud, and it was almost like it opened my heart immediately speaking that language. We-
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking about beauty. Now I have to tell you, as a scientist, this nothing could be more foreign to the way I was trained. However, a true scientist, if you're really a scientist, it means that science is always being upgraded with new discoveries and new information. And a true scientist is open, not, not a gaping mind, but has an open mind to new discoveries and new possibilities. We have 5,000 years of human experience that predates the scientific method. We cannot discount what we have learned in those 5,000 years. And there is an arrogance in science often that says science is the only way and everything else is invalid. So that may work for some people, but we're living in a world like we've never seen. And I personally, this is my personal one man's opinion, I believe that we owe it to ourselves to draw upon every iota of knowledge that we have ever accrued as a species without judging where it comes from. If it works, it works. Draw upon that wisdom and weave that wisdom into a functional wisdom that we can apply in our lives today. And I think people that do this are often surprised at how powerful and effective it is. This book, Wisdom Codes, is an example of that. So let's take a question.
yes, yes. Um, Linda asks, or sorry, Paige Onge asks, hello and thank you for your time. You mentioned that when we are in coherence, we become potent. Can you speak more on that, please? How does one get into coherence?
Yeah, well, it's beyond the scope of what I can do well here right now. So what I'll say is, in 1991, scientists, and I talk about this in a lot of books, a lot of our TV shows, all the Gaia programs. I have a free video on my personal YouTube channel that will actually lead you through the experience of creating coherence. So 1991, scientists discovered 40,000 sensory neurites in the human heart. They're essentially brain cells, but they're not in the brain. So in the human heart, it has its own neural network. It thinks independently of the cranial brain. It feels, it remembers independently of the cranial brain. So when we want to heal emotional trauma, we've got to go beyond the cranial brain. We've got to begin to address the language of the heart. So there is a technique that our ancestors understood that has now been refined in the laboratory into 3 simple steps, where we harmonize the neural network in the heart and the brain. We harmonize them through breath, focus, and feeling, and a very powerful feeling such as gratitude or appreciation. And what the harmony is, scientifically, it is a low frequency that the heart is sending to the brain, and the optimum frequency is 0.1 hertz, very low frequency. And when you can create the focus in the heart, slow the breathing to reset the vagus nerve and free yourself from fight or flight, and then create that positive emotional experience, you create this coherence between the heart and the brain. It sets up a coherence not only between the heart and the brain, but with the entire body, all the systems in the body, all the organs, all the glands come into this coherence. So it is a healthy thing to do. It optimizes your immune system. Optimizes the immune system. It's where you would begin to access deep states of intuition. It resets what's called heart rate variability, HRV, for our medical people that are listening. And the greater heart rate variability, the more resilience you have to change, to embrace change in a healthy way, and so much more. So I would invite you to go to the book. Well, actually, in this book, I describe heart-brain coherence at the beginning and I recommend that you do that, and then from within that place, apply the wisdom codes. Now, one last piece, very specifically, the brain is a polarity organ, left and right brain. So when we think about our trauma, for example, in the brain, you'll always have a good and a bad, a right and a wrong, a success, failure, worthy, not worthy. The heart, the neurons in the heart, they're not a polarity organ. And that's why when you create the coherence before you go into a difficult conversation, you are not hearing criticism, for example, in a hurtful way. You're not hearing it through the lens of success, failure, worthy, not worthy. And this is a very, very empowering place to be. So it's a long answer to a short question, but I want to spend a couple of minutes. Coherence is, we are the only form of life that we know that can create coherence on demand, harmonizing 2 separate organs into a single potent system, and then applying that system in whatever way we choose. And that is the foundation.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question from Tanya. And she asks, are there any particular medical or biological scientists that you would recommend to follow?
I definitely recommend my dear friend, my spiritual brother, my colleague I've traveled the world with, I've presented with for 30 years, Dr. Bruce Lipton. Yeah. His book, The Biology of Belief, is a landmark shift of epigenetics and our ability consciously and subconsciously to upregulate or downregulate our genes. That would be the primer for anything else. I would recommend my book that is still out. It's called Human by Design. It's actually a two-part book. My publisher wanted to emphasize the self-help nature of the book, so they renamed it to The Science of Self-Empowerment. I personally prefer the original title because that's the one the universe gave me. But that's exactly the same book, and it details a lot of what I'm talking to you about right now. I recommend those two books, and all the science reference, all the medical. I've got 40 pages of references at the back of that book if you want to go deeper.
Perfect. That's so great. I just want to say thank you so much for not only coming today and giving the Banyan community your time, but also for extending that time and your heart to us.
I love you all, and I appreciate you, my brother, and my brother behind the scenes that we don't see, but that's making this all possible today. I want to give a shout out.
Yes.
I just want to thank our community for just everything you're doing to be the best person you can be in one of the most challenging times in recorded human history. This is where we get to find out what works and what doesn't. And I think the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are for whatever life brings to our doorstep. And hopefully the time we've shared together today helps you to understand yourself a little bit better. So Ross, my brother, thank you so much. I look forward to our next.
Likewise, Greg. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, take good care.